he's loading the car on a flatbed. Well, Monday Night Raw gets out. So people in the building who have been in the building watching the show are now coming out. They're getting ready to go and get their taxis and catch their trains and go home. And they see the car. And they start throwing shit at the car. And they are pelting it with pennies and bottles and trash. So even if the damage had been confined to just the hood, now the entire car is just absolutely getting trashed. People are throwing shit, trying to knock out the back brake lights and things like that. It was insane. It was absolutely insane. So by the time Billy got it back and Howard got it over to his car guy where he had bought the car 3 weeks before, he's like, man, basically we need to redo everything. You need a whole new body. You need a new windshield. You need new tail lights. You need new this, new that. Finally, and Howard would drive it and go, well, just, it just doesn't drive the same anymore. He had it for 3 weeks. Oh, it just doesn't drive the same anymore. I don't know what's wrong with it. I think maybe when Shawn took that backdrop, it hit something that has impaired its driving ability. So Vince's like, you know what? Ribs on me. Just buy a new car. Howard's wife at the time put her foot down and called Vince and do not buy him a new car. The car's fine. So I think Vince just had the damn thing repaired and gave Howard a hefty bonus and hearty thank you, and Howard was fine.
On May 17th, we see another pretty big shock. Marty Jannetty's back, and he interrupts Michaels and challenges him for the Intercontinental title later in the show. And during their match, Mr. Perfect comes to ringside and throws his towel in Shawn's face. Marty inside cradles him and wins the Intercontinental title. This, I believe, is Marty's 4th shot in the WWF. And, of course, we know what's coming. Yeah, Marty Jannetty, man, maybe one of the most interesting stories in the history of wrestling. If you haven't already, check out that Rockers episode. But he was fired the second.
This had to be it, though,
well,
right?
No. I mean, he's been fired multiple times, and we run through the whole deal. But when you guys bring him back here, you're bringing him back and putting the belt on him. Is this not in the book of bad ideas to put the belt on a guy who's already proven himself to be untrustworthy?
There's a long history of putting championships on guys that had long histories of being not trustworthy.
Oh my gosh.
We just called that Tuesday.
Oh, it's like that.
Well, sometimes you play the hand with the cards that you're dealt.
Okay. Well, I'm not mad at it.
Okay, time out. It's fun to think about all of this stuff way after the fact, but context is king. And I don't know that we as a wrestling community have always been super fair talking about Marty Jannetty. Because whenever we're talking about a tag team and it feels like one guy's the breakout star and one guy maybe isn't, people would say, oh, he's the Marty about the guy who wasn't the big star. But in fact, if you go back and you talk to a lot of sort of wrestling gurus, they'll tell you at the time they thought Marty Jannetty was going to be the bigger star. So was it Marty's in-ring? Was it Marty's performance? Or was it Marty's outside of the ring stuff that kept him from being the star that Shawn Michaels was? Because I can't reconcile how the guy got chance after chance after chance if he wasn't a damn good performer who had great matches and someone that Vince thought could be a huge star. I mean, at the time of their breakup, it seemed that Shawn wasn't really that much better than Marty in many respects, but Shawn was maybe more dependable, if you could even believe that was a thing. But there had to be a reason, right? So here's the thing. We like to do this every now and again on our podcast. What if, right? What if the roles were reversed? What if Shawn had some of his problematic behavior early in his WWE run and they went with Marty instead? What if it was the reverse? What if Marty is the one doing the super kicking and Shawn Michaels is the one flying through the glass? Marty's issues perhaps would have remained the same, but would Shawn have been lost in the shuffle, or would the cream have risen to the top? That's another thing worth debating to me. Like, what if that breakup goes differently? Does Shawn still get where he winds up, or does the company, timing is everything, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I think bringing Marty back to win the Intercontinental title has to be a vote of confidence from Vince McMahon. But again, does some of this come back to, well, he was easier to do business with? And can you imagine? I mean, knowing how problematic the stories are going to be with Shawn Michaels in just a few years after that, can you imagine that Shawn Michaels was somehow easier to do business with than Marty Jannetty? Or at least that's perhaps what the thinking was at the time. Either way, we've got to talk about Marty's, much talked about firing as a sign that Vince McMahon really liked him and had faith, trust, and confidence in him. And I don't know, man, it's just fun to sort of what if an armchair quarterback, how this all could have been different had the roles been reversed. And I know what you're saying. Oh, that could never happen. Do you really not think Marty Jannetty could have had a hell of a ladder match with Razor at WrestleMania 10? Of course he could. Could Marty have had a great match with Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 12? Of course he could. Could Marty have carried Kevin Nash to a great match at a pay-per-view? Of course he could. Marty Jannetty was a worker, man. He could have checked all those boxes. It's just fun to think about those what ifs. Let's get back to it.
Shawn says the next week they're in Nova Scotia and he went to talk to Vince. He said, I knew I was going to win the belt back from Marty and I was concerned about my matches getting stale. Ever since I'd won the title, I had been doing a lot of DQs and countouts and every match ended the same way. My opponent and I would put on an exciting show, but the endings were just brutal and took the wind out of our sails. He asked me what I wanted to do about it. What about giving me a bodyguard? Vince asked, who do you have in mind? Well, back in March, after I'd separated my shoulder in the match against the Nasties, I was sitting at home one Saturday night and decided to turn on the WCW Saturday Night Show. I was always working on the weekend, so I never actually had a chance to watch that. Now that I had the time, I figured out I'd check it out. So I'm watching, and I see this guy named Vinny Vegas do an interview. He was really funny and entertaining, and I couldn't help but notice he's huge. I think they were billing him at something like 7 feet and over 300 pounds, which was pretty accurate. So I saw this guy on WCW TV and I mentioned him. Vince said, I can't do that, Shawn. I don't want any WCW guys coming in. There are legal and contract issues I just don't want to deal with. And so Shawn pushes, but he's very funny. And Vince says, it's a contract issue. I don't want to get into it. We'll put this idea together and see what happens. And he used to say that a lot. So he comes out of our meeting and I go looking for Rick and Scott Steiner. I knew they'd just been in WCW and they might know about this guy. So I find Rick Steiner and ask him, and he says, oh yeah, that's Kevin Nash. He's a good buddy of mine. I ask what his deal is. I saw him on TV, thought he was a riot, and Rick puts him over huge. He's a great guy. So Shawn pitches he'd actually like to do the bodyguard gimmick with him to Rick Steiner and wants to know what the contract situation for Kevin is. So Rick says, I've got his number. I'll go call him right now. So he goes down the hall and uses a payphone and calls him. And Kevin says, I'd love to do it. So the very next day, Kevin Nash tries to get out of his contract. And ta-da, before you know it, Kevin Nash is going to be at TV the next week with Shawn Michaels. It's amazing how all this came together. What do you remember about Diesel coming into the company?
Well, I do remember Shawn coming in and having the idea about the bodyguard and all that. We did have to be extremely careful because you couldn't tamper with someone's contract. The very first question that you have to ask them is, are you under contract? If they answer yes, next question is, when are you free and when do you have the ability in your contract to negotiate and to talk? Then they give you a date, mark it down, and that's when you go back and talk to them. But to talk to, especially someone in my capacity or Vince or JJ or Pat, we were not allowed, man. You just couldn't have that conversation with the talent because that's tampering with their contracts. How you get around that is, talent talks to talent. And if they want to share some of their contractual details, then they sure as hell can, which is what happened in this case. And we still were like, hey, he's under contract. We can't talk to him. How could you talk to him? If he had a window in the contract where he could negotiate, or if he was not under contract at all. So that's when Kevin Nash went down and got his release. And I think he told him he was going to go back to being a bouncer in a strip club and wanted to just be free and clear of the wrestling business. He was done. He'd given it a shot and wanted to move on. Ole wasn't doing anything with him. They had nothing for him, so they gave him his release. He immediately faxed it over to J.J. Dillon, and the rest, as I say, is history.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.